I also just want to remind everyone to make sure that when they come in, their microphones are muted. Um, all the other panel members and or guests, if you are receiving or see any inappropriate behavior, please let either myself, Isaac, Stacy, or Afia know. We don't want any gate crashers in. Also, if you scroll on the chat, which is again where you can leave your questions, you can find our social media handles as the first message.
Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker. So Zaretha Brown is a cultural producer, arts manager and leader with 20 years experience in community and participatory arts and large-scale events. Over the last 10 years, she has led on culture for Brent Council, most recently leading the production of the Brent 2020 No Base Like Home digital archive and online festival, which captured the borough's reggae history through community stories, as well as the Windrush 70 exhibition, a heritage project co-produced with the community to celebrate the contributions of the Windrush community in Brent, and development of the borough's cultural Olympiad programme and the Olympic torch relay route. A CLAW Leadership Programme alumni, she is passionate about equality and access and committed to creating deep and meaningful engagement which affects lasting change. So Zaretha, over to you.
Hi, hello everybody, and welcome, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this event tonight. Really excited to be here and really excited to share with you my experience of what the Caribbean Front Room means to me, but also the work that I've done with communities around it.
So if we go ahead, the floor is yours.
Okay, so do you just want me to talk about what I've done? And yeah, okay, cool. So the room that I'm sitting in at the moment is my front room, but a bit of background to that, this used to be my my grandmother's house, who passed away 12 years ago, and I now am fortunate enough to continue living in the family house. But this room doesn't look like what it looked like when I grew up. This was what that front room was like. It was a room that we weren't really allowed to come into unless we were invited to come in by my grandmother. And it was also the room that if she had friends or guests over, that she would entertain within this space. Memories that I have around the front room, it was, as I said, like really, really pristine, very well kept, lots of beautiful pictures, lots of beautiful ornaments and artifacts, pictures on the wall that kind of connected her back to the Caribbean. So my heritage is I'm half Trinidadian and I'm also half Jamaican. My grandmother was from Trinidad, so lots of sort of maps and things that reminded her of home, but also the front room also signified to her and to a lot of Caribbeans that I've spoken to, an element of success of coming into the UK at a time when they weren't necessarily welcomed in the way that they expected to be welcomed, leaving their homes in the Caribbean, leaving big houses, open land, coming into the UK, which looked very different and was very hostile, and living accommodation was very different. To be able to buy your house and to be able to have a front room, as it were, was something that was really special, and a sense of pride as well. And we captured this when we did the Windrush exhibition at Brent Council 3 years ago now. So our exhibition was all around telling the story of the contribution of Caribbean people that came and resided to Brent, but also the contribution they made not just to the borough but wider. But an element of that, we got talking around this idea of the front room, the Caribbean front room, what it meant. And it was actually Dr. Michael Macmillan's exhibition that inspired me to think about doing an installation within Brent Museum and Archive space. we were successful in securing money from Arts Council England, which allowed us to build out the exhibition so that it was a photography exhibition, it was an oral history exhibition. We were able to collect oral histories from individuals within the community we worked with, but we were also able to create a front room installation. What was really beautiful is that we were able to do it with the community. So I'm going to put some images up in a minute, but the artifacts that we were able to put in that installation were really, they were authentic. They literally came from people's homes. A lot of stuff also came from my home as well. So let me see if I can share my screen with you and I can show you. Oh, am I able to share? It says that the host is disabled.
Of course. Let me have a look. I'm just going to find you in the chat. You should be able to, what does it say under it?
Oh, I can do it now.
Oh, good, great, thank you.
So can you see my screen? Okay, so can everybody see this? Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Amazing. So this was the installation that we created, as I said, as part of our Windrush exhibition in part of the museum space in Brent. We created this from a shell, literally, and through sort of talking with the community around memories of the front room, through also taking inspiration from Dr. Michael Macmillan's exhibition, and through my own memories, we were able to create this installation. And, you know, things that you'd see featured very much in a Caribbean house of the time was lots of plastic flowers and plants. Our photographer, who was documenting, capturing portraits of the Caribbean community for the exhibition. She's of Italian descent, so this was all quite new to her, learning about sort of the Caribbean diaspora, but particularly the Caribbean connection with Windrush. Every house that she went into, I remember her coming back to me and saying, there's just so many plants and flowers. It was one thing that she kind of felt that was really unique about a West Indian front room. The photographs as well, if I move into the next slide. So the photographs from the mantelpiece. So these photographs here actually are, that's my grandmother. And my mother was one of the little girls as a bridesmaid. This is my grandmother, the clock, the ornaments. The Caribbean people were, by and large, very religious. So there was always some sort of paraphernalia that kind of connected them back to the religion. The clock, lots of Caribbean households had this spiky looking clock. And again, I come back to this ideology around being able to actually have this living room that was pride of place, a space that remained untouched unless you were entertaining, but very much children weren't allowed to go in there unless you were going in there to clean. And I hear stories about some front rooms where it was actually locked to keep the kids out. And you know, obviously a lot of where we tried as much as possible to become to get the artifacts that really kind of brought out the essence of what a front room would have been like. So things like the chicken and the dog. This dog, actually, when we opened the exhibition, one of our community members, he came in and he said, there's something not quite right, there's something missing. Do you know what? I'm going to go home and get it. And he came back with this dog, and it was like, we had this in our front room. And like a lot of Caribbean houses that you went to, you would see some sort of dog or, you know, some sort of porcelain figure, the coffee table, and then also here over on your right, the gram. Now, unfortunately, we couldn't get our hands on a blue spot gram, which was the one that if you had a blue spot gram back in the days, that was the top notch of like of gramophone. You'd made it. But we were able to get our hands on a gram, and again, this was a really important part of a Caribbean featured in a Caribbean home is the music again. And I come back again, I don't know if you can, how much of it you can see, there's a picture up here of, there's a religious picture up here of the Last Supper. You've got a picture up here. You've got the flag. You've also got the scroll. A lot of Caribbean homes will have a scroll from whatever island they're from. And then, of course, the cabinet here, which again, I remember particularly growing up and spending time with my grandmother, but even living with my parents, that was my Sunday chore, was cleaning every single one of these figurines. That was a way to kind of literally get out of the house or any sort of pocket money was to do most of that cleaning. And then just the final image, just again, just on the gram, the flowers. So all of these sort of little things that are really kind of like quite unique to what a Caribbean front room would have felt like. And when we opened this exhibition, the response that we got from it was amazing, particularly from the people that helped us shape and build it. On the actual day that we opened it, on the launch day, we had so many people in the front room that were just coming in, and it was triggering memories for them. They were in there talking and debating and laughing, and we literally had to kick them out when closing time came, because everyone just felt so comfortable. But there was other moments as well that like really stick with me, where people would just come to see it independently. I remember coming down to walking past the installation and seeing a lady in there just stood looking at the pictures on the wall, but she was crying. And I asked her if she was okay. She said, no, I'm fine, but it's just, this is just really kind of brought back memories of what it was like for me and the connection back to my grandparents growing up. So the response to the exhibition was absolutely fantastic. And what's really lovely, again, is that we have all of this stuff in our museum and in storage. And from this, we've also gone on to create toolkits. We have built a whole education element around it as part of our heritage learning. We've got like a little learning box that we have worked with different communities, particularly communities, dementia communities, because it's really, really helpful in terms of memory. So it's just been an amazing experience. It was an amazing experience working on this project, but also highlighting the importance and what it stood for and what it represented for our communities. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Zaretha. That was very, very interesting. I've just seen some comments on the chat. I'll just point out, someone said it's very similar to the Asian family front rooms, which were mainly reserved for visitors. Another one said it's interesting how many of these elements were not unique to us, but more broadly working class and or of the era. I'll just hold in terms of questions or anything. Thank you very much, everyone, to show a bit of appreciation for Zaretha. After our next speaker has spoken, then we will take some questions from the floor or from the chat box as well. So Zaretha, please stay with us. We'll be interested to hear more from you. If I hand over to Isaac now.
Hello. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Macmillan. He's a London-based playwright, editor, artist curator, and scholar. His curatorial practice includes No Colour Bar, Black British Art in Action, 1960 to 1990, Rockers, Soul Heads and Lovers, Soul Systems Back in the Day, and the critically acclaimed Front Room, which will be open as a permanent period room in the Museum of the Home, formerly the Jeffrey Museum, from 2021, as well as a triptych film installation of his recent performance piece, Waiting for Myself to Appear. His books include The Black Boy Pub and Other Stories, The Front Room, Migrant Aesthetics in the Home. He has the first arts doctorate from Middlesex University in 2010, and he's currently an associate lecturer in cultural and historical studies at the London College of Fashion, and research associate at the Visual Identities in Art and Design Research Centre at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Macmillan, please do take it away.
I should unmute myself. That would be very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
You are unmuted, yeah.
Thank you, Isaac, for that introduction. And thank you, Afria, for connecting. It's amazing that connecting with Afria was through LinkedIn and through social media. And for some of you younger people that may say, well, you know, that goes without saying, but, you know, I'm kind of registering generation on here in terms of an intergenerational kind of conversation. Is it possible to share my screen?
Yes, it should be.
I'm going to do it now. Is it up? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So before I begin, just to thank and welcome people into this this session here. I have friends and families and colleagues as well. Before I start, I just wanted to dedicate what I'm going to do, this presentation, to my dear cousin Willie Ford, who passed away a year ago to the day, and he was a fondly remembered cousin of mine. In thinking about the kind of front room, and you notice I no longer call it the West Indian front room, which is originally, because it's gone beyond that now, in a sense. And as an artist, you know, we never know what impact our work will have on the public. But this is certainly it's humble beginnings in High Wycombe. Both my parents are from St. Vincent. High Wycombe is part of the Vincentian diaspora. It then moved on because I then realized that in some sense it resonated across not only the Caribbean, the Afro-Caribbean, but the Black British, much less other migrant communities and working class communities that I think that was mentioned earlier. And then it went to Manchester as the West Indian front room there. And in doing that, I realized I had something really powerful. Who chatting there? And then it came to London, and this was one of the iterations. This is one of the iterations in Curacao, and this is really large found objects called a living room surrounded by salt. And actually the salt around the installation, actually in Curacao, people thought there was a spiritual ritual that I was performing, because normally things get stolen in this area and people never cross the line because they thought there was a ritual being performed. And then we have this later iteration in South Africa, the front room in Joburg. And it was very interesting in a kind of post-apartheid space to kind of recreate this room, because it signified on some level how the British Empire travels. And then its most successful iteration was at the Jeffrey Museum, and it was its most successful exhibition there, and it's called the West Indian Front Room. I call it deliberately West Indian because it speaks to a particular moment when West Indians came here to this country and realized they were West Indian in meeting other West Indians. It's also that moment of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist struggle. It's the moment of the civil rights era. It's the moment of Black power. It's the moment of Black is beautiful. And this was the installation we created. And here are some of the images. It was fun doing it. As mentioned earlier, it's now returned to the Museum of the Home. It will be opening this spring as a permanent, and I emphasize permanent, because often as workers, Black artists, we're very temporary. Where do we exist as permanent features to kind of politically say that we're not going anywhere, we're part of British society. So I am also talking about diaspora here, and I suppose the politics of dealing with cultural institutions such as museums and galleries. And some of my fellow colleagues in here may want to kind of speak to that in a moment. But some of the objects I wanted to kind of just talk about, Zendrifa mentioned her lovely installation, and I was really impressed by that. But one of the heating elements was the electric fly. Here we have a paraffin heater. This precedes central heating. And this is what was used for domestic heating. And those of you who experienced it may be traumatized by seeing this thing again. But this was actually my dad's. And then we have green chill stamps, because they speak to that moment of deferred gratification for my parents' generation. But of course, Caribbean migrants arriving here, much less elsewhere, did not arrive with their front rooms, okay? And that speaks to this moment around Brexit now, because, you know, the narrative of immigration still continues. But they lived in one room. They found it easier to find somewhere to live and to find somewhere to work, even though they would see signs saying no dogs, no coloureds, no Irish. So it was a struggle for those early Caribbean migrants. But they were proud, and they came with a sense of dignity and respectability packed deep in their suitcases. And as soon as they arrived, they could, using something like the partner hand, for instance, they were able to acquire their homes and then create their front rooms. Zarifa showed the radiogram on the blue spot. That was very important for these early Caribbean migrants, because they were excluded from pubs and clubs. So they entertained themselves at home with music, imported music. And I have here this one of my classic ones that I grew up with, the Mighty Sparrows, Mr. Walker. Any of you may know the tune, you can sing along. And then of course there's Jim Reeves, that country and Western crooner that is kind of just fetishized across the diaspora. I mean, it's amazing, you know. But Jim Reeves, of course, would only be played usually on a Sunday because he was quite religious. You couldn't play any buff music on a Sunday except Jim Reeves. So the radiogram was very important in the front room because it was like a religious object. And then we have the things in the front room, and there's so many, and Zarifa has kind of spoken to them, a few of them. I wanted to mention the crochet, because the crochet is very important in terms of Caribbean women's skill and their creative skill, because crochet was brought to the Caribbean by missionaries, taught to Caribbean women. Women then transformed this, because European crochet is very flat and white, but Caribbean women kind of like use starch to make these sculptural patterns, you know, and brought something different in terms of crochet practice. Here we have a display here with some artificial flowers, because there was never any real flowers in the front, it was all artificial. And the blow glass fish that many homes had. They have Bambi here, the orange Bambi. I included this because it's amazing, because it never got smashed. Remember, ornaments got broken because children sometimes would come into the front room when they weren't allowed. But this Bambi, after the Walt Disney film, never seemed to kind of get broken. And then we have the sofa. This one, we couldn't get it plastic covered, but you have the chair backs, the antimacassars, and of course the wallpaper and the carpet that never seemed to match. You can sense, when I'm speaking about the front room, I grew up, I thought it was kitsch, really. I thought it spoke about a kind of colonial kind of mentality my parents brought with them, those values of propriety and decorum. But also it spoke to a kind of modernity, a post-colonial modernity. And it wasn't until I was doing some oral history work in High Wycombe for this book, The Black Boy Pub, that I realized, oh my God, I've grown up with this room, it's part of me. It's then I became in love, I suppose, with the front room and let go of that kind of sense of kitsch. But kitsch is also attached to the taste of working class people. And I want to kind of reclaim kitsch now. And certainly at this moment, kitsch is seen as cool, because there's a lot of interest in the current generation with this kind of vintage style. So that's kind of really fascinating. And then there are things on the wall. And Zarifa hinted at that with the black velour scroll. Some interesting contradictions or juxtapositions in the front room would be the Last Supper next to this scantily clad Tina. And sometimes I was told that in religious homes, you wouldn't have Tina in there because it was just kind of inappropriate. You'd have the pictures of portraits. Here's a wedding photo. Sometimes the frame was just as important as the photo. And then you'd have iconic figures like Muhammad Ali. So this is just a kind of a taste really of the images on the wall. The other significant thing about the front room for me was the arrival of the television. Because as been said earlier, children weren't allowed, but when television arrived, it now became a space where everybody could come in. And the television, initially it was black and white. We then got color. Some people used to put a green screen on the black and white television to pretend it was color. But the point is about television was that now the outside world was coming into the room, the home, the Caribbean home. And we had programs like Love Thy Neighbor, Till Death Do Us Part, because, you know, watching television in those days, we kind of thought white people were going to be on television for the rest, forever. And when you had a black person on television, the whole house would rush down. In fact, the whole street would arrive to see this black presence. But then we had Roots, based on Alex Haley's novel during the 1970s. And this drama series, which has since been remade, was a significant event for Caribbean homes on a Sunday, because the next day we'd go into school and we wouldn't want any of our white friends talking to us because of the power of this drama. The other photos here include from Neil Kinloch, represents for me an important aspect of the front room because it's really a woman's room. It was my mother's room. She controlled, she dressed that room. The fruits of her labor went into decorating and dressing that room, even though it was used by men. And this photo here by Neil Kinloch with this woman in this glorious white dress, you know, her hand on her hips on the drinks cabinet, for me symbolized this is her space. She has dressed it. She has worked hard to kind of dress it, and that's significant. The other thing about the front room is what it was used for. Now, of course, there were prayer meetings and religious meetings, but there were also parties. And here you have a couple here from one of Vanley Burke's images, because you had parties, christenings, birthday parties. You even had funeral wakes. So you had the night, you might have the nine-night. And when both my parents passed away, both of their coffins, each of their coffins were displayed, open casket in the front room the day before they were buried, as part of their nine-night. So the front room is a versatile, multifunctional kind of space. And in a way, I'm kind of responding to some of the questions that Afri had asked me about what is the legacy of the front room, in a sense, for Caribbean people across the diaspora. And here's an image from the iteration of the front room in the Netherlands. I think significantly it's about diaspora. I mean, I'm very interested in our reach in terms of the African diaspora. But in a sense, for me, my intention of doing the front room was not to kind of as a nostalgic recreation of my parents' space, but more a site of rebellion. I was rebelling during the 1970s, finding my own sense of Black Britishness about what this room meant. 1976, you know, we had uprisings in the Notting Hill Carnival. 1981, we had the fire in New Cross, where 13 young Black people were killed, the Black Day of Action, the uprisings in Brixton. And so the front room was going on at this time, these moments of revolts and resistance. So in a way, I kind of wanted to say something about that and what is the legacy for us? I think there is some interesting questions about, even though now we don't crowd our rooms maybe like this, we're more IKEA, we like to think we're more minimalist. There are some practices which I think we inherit. Certainly this idea of discipline and hygiene. We kind of seem to be obsessed with hygiene as a people. Maybe that goes back to colonialism, I don't know. But certainly what is significant about the front room for me is that in looking back into the past, to take this idea of the Sankova bird, to look back into the past to understand the present, we get a sense of who we are, you know, because we're often represented in the British popular imaginary as if we live on the street. We have no homes, we have no values, we have no families to go to. And doing this project has been for us to represent our complex values, some of the kind of contradictory kind of ideas we have in the home and thoughts, and identities. But also to speak about how things, the material cultural objects, mean something to us because they have agency. They really do affect us. And it's been amazing for me how, in doing this project, certain things just evoke or invoke memories for people in thinking about their own experience of growing up at this period. So that is me for the moment. I can feel some other questions in thinking about the front room. I'm going to stop share for a moment.
Thank you, Dr. McMillan. That was really, really insightful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Everyone, if you can, please applaud him. Obviously, I know we're doing it silently at home, but please, because it was brilliant. Thank you so much. So we're now going to take questions from people in the audience, which is a good starting point. Let's have a look at some and see which way we go.
Dorothea's got a question about the smell of the paraffin.
No, that wasn't my question. It was,
Oh.
Who was it? Mr. Westermass?
Mr. Westermass.
Yeah, on the chat above me.
Yeah.
And he was asking about smells, which I thought was really interesting. And
well,
yeah,
anyone who hasn't had the experience of smelling kerosene in the home, it's another experience. I mean, as they say, who feels it or who smells it knows it. Because paraffin was toxic. And we look back and think, my God, as children, we had to go and collect this paraffin, this inflammable fluid from petrol stations. I mean, you know, health and safety would have questions about that now, but I mean, that's what we did. And of course, the paraffin permeated our clothes. So at school, we used to kind of make jokes of other children who still had to use paraffin because you could smell it on their clothes. The paraffin heater also caused numerous fires. A friend of mine, when she came to see the exhibition, was traumatized when she saw the paraffin heater because her house was burnt down because of the paraffin heater.
Michael, just jumping in there, in our exhibition, we actually did have a paraffin heater. It was one actually that came out of my grandmother's house. We were going to chuck it away, and then my mum said, "No, you got to keep that, and we got to keep the grips as well." So when we were putting exhibition together, I remember that I had it, but it was all rusty. So we had to put it in a display case as opposed to leaving it out. But exactly, all of the things that you described, it was really a talking point of the exhibition. People would come, they would see it, and they would talk about having to go and get the kerosene for it. They would laugh about like the burns. And also we had an Afro comb. So we had a lot of people laughing about the hot iron comb and how they had to put the hot iron comb on the paraffin heater to do their hair and then get burnt. So yeah, but I guess just from my point of view in response to that question, I'm a little bit younger in terms of the paraffin. My recollections of smells would have been the food. And as I said, I come from half Trinidadian, so in this house it very much was always pilau or roti with curry goat. That's what I remember. And then the other thing I remember is the smell of rum, because as you say, when they opened up the room for parties, the dominoes, the soca, and the rum is what I remember the smell of.
Yeah. Zarifa, what do you think the legacies for you are of the front room in terms of your own domestic space?
I mean, as you said, like I'm much more minimal now than my mum. I go to my parents, and my parents have still got that slightly chaotic pictures and everything around in their living room. But for me, I'm much more subtle. So I have very small sort of like nods back to sort of what would have been in a historic Caribbean West Indian front room. But yeah, I think for me there's almost a danger of us losing the legacy, isn't it? As we don't like dress our spaces in that particular way. So for me, it's around documenting the work that certainly that you've done, and I'm really, really blessed to hear that it is going to be on permanent display, because I think having that as an educational tool, and for us when we did the exhibition, it was that educational point, but also as a lot of people are saying in the chat, we had different people from the community saying, well, actually this wasn't necessarily unique to a Caribbean home as such.
No.
You know, they had people that were saying they're from Irish background, and it felt very much like the Irish working class or Asian working class. But I think for, as we both said, for the Caribbean, it's more about a moment in time, and a moment in time recognizing that. I think that differentiates it from just it being another front room. So for me, some of the legacy is around collecting, preserving, documenting, but also sharing that.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think there's an important point you've made about how the front room resonates across different communities. I remember when we did the exhibition at the Jeffrey Museum, you had black and white friends come into the exhibition and say, oh, we had one of them, not realizing that their neighbor was just the same as them on some level. What does that say? Something about the kind of racial connections in this country? But also for me, how from an artistic point of view and a cultural point of view, it represents how we have been transformative in British society, in bringing a sense of style, in bringing a sense of creolized style to the British landscape, as it were. And I think that's quite significant, and something to unpack and discuss and document, as you say. I've been blessed also with a lot of people kind of passing away and passing on things to me. So for the new installation at the Museum of the Home, we do have an actual authentic blue spot, Blaupunkt radiogram that has provenance from a Jamaican woman in Manchester who didn't have any children and could invest and preserve the things that she acquired. And so the radiogram we have actually works. It's in working condition.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and when we did our launch night, the radiogram we have didn't work, so we had to, we were pretending to play music from it. So we had like a Bluetooth speaker hidden behind the actual thing, and we had some records. But as you say, that like for us, it was really hard to try and find that gram, because, you know, unless someone donates it to you, it's very, very hard. And a lot of the stuff that we have now in the collections are things that I donated and things that the community were happily donated to us, so that we do have that representation within the museum.
Yeah. Another question, Zarifa? I'm curious. Do you feel that you inherit some of your mother's style, not just in dress, but also in the domestic space?
I don't know. I mean, I'm half Trinidadian, but my dad is Jamaican, and my dad is a musician. My dad's part of Trojan Records.
Oh wow!
Session musicians that came up in the 70s to promote reggae music. And this is a different conversation, but obviously, like many of you all know, there's that islander thing. So growing up in a dual island household, a Jamaican and a Caribbean space, the Jamaican was the more dominant. So I actually tend to lean to more of the Jamaican in terms of music. And I take on more sort of like, more of a connection with the Jamaican side. However, the Trini side of me is still fully in there, particularly when it comes to soca, carnival, and all of that, and food as well. So I guess I'm a mash of both, I think.
Mash up of both.
Of both of them, yeah.
Yes, you're a pillow, you're a cook-up.
Yes.
This is great. Yes. I mean, that thing of, I'm born here like yourself, and both my parents are from Vincentian, but growing up, because Jamaica was such the powerful culture, if you thought I was Jamaican, I wouldn't deny it.
Yeah.
Because they thought we're all Jamaican, from that British idea that, you're all the same.
Yeah.
And it having that image carried currency, certainly on the street.
Definitely. But I think what was also driving that was like the rise and the influence of, I suppose, reggae. You know,
Yes.
you had 68 with Trojan setting up, you had, Island, you had Jetstar. And I think, as you said, like everybody sort of got tarred with the same reggae brush. So it didn't matter like what island you were from, as long as you were black, and you
Yeah.
were Caribbean, you had to be Jamaican.
Exactly. And I think it's also now important to talk about the different areas of the Caribbean. You know, you're part Trinidadian. You know, what is the kind of ethnicity, the ethnic mix, the culture, the food. I mean, it was really great that we had a bit of salsa playing, because, you know, the Caribbean, the archipelago is not simply Anglophone, you know. It's Spanish, it's Dutch, it's French, it's Portuguese. So I'm thinking, were there any other questions? I mean, people are putting a lot of things in the chat.
I just have 2 questions, if that's all right. I know there's a lot of conversation in the chat. Just want to get in before everyone. But 2 questions for both of the our speakers. Is it fair to say that a lot of the Caribbean front rooms, just as a millennial trying to understand the culture, a lot of the influence on the front rooms is UK rather than us trying to replicate the Caribbean front room in the Caribbean, if you understand what I mean? Because it seems like there's a lot of crossover with other kind of West African front rooms as well. So is it more of the UK influence rather than the original home influence? And then the second question is, why is it only company we're allowed in them?
Do you want to go, Zarifa?
On the first question around the sort of the replicating, so from the work that we did with our Caribbean, with our communities, I think there's something a bit of both. It was that wanting to connect back to the Caribbean, which is why you had like the scroll, the images of like whatever island they were from, but also this kind of sense that, yeah, they were from the Caribbean, but they were starting to slowly adopt this Black British identity and being able to show, you know, relatives back in the Caribbean, look what we've achieved. You know, I think, and I don't know, like if you would agree with me, but when they first came over, they came over expecting something completely different. And as you touched upon, living in accommodation, there was multiple people. They probably didn't want to go back and tell their families back home what they'd left. They'd come to the UK to make it, to kind of, you know, to build on what they'd left. So by the time they'd actually like, you know, managed to save, buy a house, the front room was this idea of being able to connect back to the Caribbean through the lens of, this is what we've achieved in the UK, this is us in the UK, but actually we're bringing some of that with us as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Zarifa. I mean, I think from a very pragmatic point of view, all immigrants, even today, arrive with nothing and they have to survive. So they look around them and they use whatever is available. They kind of make do until they can do better. Mm-hmm. And they come with a sense of aspiration, yeah? Because as you mentioned, you know, they came here for better opportunities. A lot of them expected to go back after 5 years. They have now kids here, they can't go back. So they have to make this their home. They have to make that so. So in a sense, I think they're looking forward. They're looking forward. What I think is interesting is that the things that they had here, that they found here, because, you know, they didn't come with anything really, they couldn't, is that they creolized everything they found. So why is it that people from the African Caribbean diaspora, much less Africa as well, we have so much color in our homes? That is aesthetically reflects something about where we come from. And how we dress our homes represents for me a kind of creolization, just like our language, a nation language, which is on some level English, yes, but also Africanized. It's got a sense of rhythm to it. You know, it's alive, it's dynamic, it's vibrant. And I think in a way, that's what we kind of bring in the style of the front room, in a sense. And then at some point, you know, people thought, oh yeah, you can find that black scroll, you know, and they go back home and they bring back souvenirs from back home. I think what's amazing for me is like the church outings that people went on, and they'd collect souvenirs from Margate and Brighton and Great Yarmouth and put them on display. in the front room, especially if they went to Paris. Oh my God, if they went to Paris, that would go at the front. So the front room is also about kind of showing off who we want to be in the private domain, in a sense, you know. And as a people, we love style. We love the newest things. We love the modern things. Because today the front room would be that flat screen, big flat screen TV, you know, to kind of say, look, we have money. And, you know, it was wonderful doing the film Tales from the Front Room, because we kind of were able to unpack a lot of that, those kind of ideas. I don't know if that answers the questions that people had. Oh, why is it only certain company allowed? Oh, well, of course, only adults are really allowed, traditionally allowed in the front room. You know, when my parents had guests coming around, we kids couldn't be around in there because it's big people doing big people things. And then we'd been invited in to meet someone we didn't know. And they'd say, oh, look how they get big and this and that. And then
you'd be sitting on the stairs though a lot of the time, listening to the big people.
That's listening to the juicy comments and conversation that's going on. And then you'd have to be told to come out.
Yeah.
Come out and go and do something. Go do your homework or do something, because this is big people chat going on in the front room. Because the front room was about, it is about, in a sense, that space for remembering, where people would reminisce about, you know, backstories from back home. But it's also the space of darkness. It's where also people will have terrible things being communicated in the front room. On some level, it's also an oppressive space in terms of gender. So I'm maybe contradicting myself here, but you know, ideas around gender are kind of, or patriarchy are kind of sometimes reinforced in the front room, but at the same time challenged. So the front room is a contradictory space. Could you say a bit more about the Dutch? Oh, that's an interesting. When shall I answer that question, Zarif, about the Dutch?
Yeah.
So I did an installation in Amsterdam called Van House Out. You know, I've been going to Amsterdam like a lot of people who go to the red light district, go to the coffee shops. Until I started doing this exhibition, I went to a part of Amsterdam that people don't know called the Southeast, where you have the Belma. I got off the train. I thought I was in Dulce. I thought I was in Brixton. Black people, Nigerian, Ghanaian, Caribbean. And in Holland, the people who were settled there a lot later than here are from Suriname, from the Caribbean and the Antilles. And the room that I kind of created was a mixture of Antillean, so the Caribbean, so that's Curacao, Aruba, Surinamese, Indonesian, and Moroccan. So it's a kind of mismatch, a mismatch, as it were, a mashup of a room in terms of a kind of multicultural Dutch space. One of the things that was fascinating in doing that project in the Netherlands was how, particularly religion, from Suriname, you have the Winti religion. And you can equate that to, say, Comina or Shango in Trinidad, or Lokomi in Cuba. In the British Caribbean, we tend to hide these African elements of our spirituality. In Suriname, they're proud of it. And so in their homes, they would have a Winti altar. They would have, they would mark and remember the spirits in terms of their homes. We also had, from the Antilles, we have what's the Lokomi or Santeria, yeah, which connects to the Orishas from Yoruba. And people on some level would be proud to display that in their homes. But this is a complex question in public about how people are going to confess to being devotees of these practices, when in the mainstream, these things are seen as black magic and are demonized, if you know what I mean. Certainly in the British Caribbean, these are, you know, obia, people who see obeah as the practice of evil, not recognizing obeah is more about healing. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about our own ritual African practices that continued in the Caribbean, which we continue to today. Yeah, so that was something that I found in doing the Dutch Caribbean front room there, was that there's a lot of similarities between us and there are differences.
Could I ask, Dorothea mentioned that there were anti-maca styles on the sofa. What are they? I might know what they look like, but I don't know what they.
Antimacassars are called chairbacks, and they come from the Victorian era. And antimacassars are macassar oil, and because gentlemen wore oil in their hair, so the chairbacks or antimacassars were to stop soiling on the back of the sofa, and that's where their function.
Later, they came in handy for the wet look.
Yes.
Oh, I see. I've seen them, but I didn't know. I thought they were just like.
No, they have a name. I had to look it up for a poem I was doing. The antimacassars. Yeah.
I know them as chairbacks, and I remember chairbacks were the bane of my life. My mum had chairbacks, and every time, and if we and my brother and sisters were ramping and the chairbacks got messed up, that instantly was big trouble, and it was constant. I actually didn't even want to sit on the chairs because of the chairbacks.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, this is why they used to get angry when they used to fall off. I never used to understand why. No one explained to me why they used to get angry. So was that quite a big thing specifically for Black people then, rather than other ethnic groups, considering hair?
No, I've not just for Black people. I think white working class people are very similar, are very proud of their own front rooms as well. There's a sense of that, you know, order is beauty and beauty is order, and everything must look right. I think it's very similar for white working class homes as well, and other migrant communities. Yeah, because the front room really is it's the public space and the private home. It's where the public come in. You know, you get the pastor, the policeman, the teacher, the Avon lady, the insurance person. They all come into the front room. You know, that's where you kind of host. That's where you show hospitality to visitors. So everything's got to look immaculate. Hence why you wouldn't have children coming in here to mess it up.
Michael, there's a question in the chat about whether the front room is still the pride of place in our homes. So, I mean, for me, I try to make it be the pride of place in my home.
Yeah.
But I guess as times change and attitudes change, I'm probably not as strict on my children as my parents were strict on me. So my kids come into the front room, and it's a battle to try and keep it that pride of place. But certainly for me, my approach is to have it as a pride of place. And still have, like, you know, I have images up in here. I have like some figurines, for want of a better word, but as I said, like, and as you said, more sort of the modern things that you would see in a front room. And very much, if people do come over, this is where, you know, all the entertaining would happen. The other thing to say as well is actually that do you remember the bars? Do you remember the bar?
The cocktail bar.
Yeah, because there's a question in here about liquor. So I still have my grandmother's bar.
Oh, amazing.
And it's full of glasses in there, which haven't been touched for about 40 years.
Oh, you see, now you like your mother. Now you like your mother. It's only for show. It's only for show. It's only for show. I was going to ask, do you use it as a cocktail bar? And, you know, kind of.
No, unfortunately.
Kind of mixed drinks and so on.
It is literally just there for show. People come in and they're like, oh, the bar. But I keep threatening to be able to go behind there and like pull out the occasionally I pull out the glasses, but literally they're so thick of dust because they've not been used.
Come on, man, you have to clean that, man.
Yeah, I know.
Come on.
I get my kids. I should get the kids to do it.
That's right. That's do what your mother did. You'd have to pass on the tradition. Get your kids. Yeah. I think that's a really good question. Do we still have the front room? I've asked quite a few people, if they had the space in their homes, they would have this space reserved, dedicated, that could always be open for guests. And it was always be immaculate, and you wouldn't have kids coming in there messing about. But practically, the way that properties and people's living spaces in this country here have shrunk. It's not very practical, but I think we do still designate a space, that space in the home, for hospitality, where we display the things about who we are and what we want. So definitely photographs. Photographs are really important because they're visual evidence that we exist and we come from somewhere, and we all want to know that where we come from. Certificates, all of our things. What I think is interesting, that younger people pride themselves on being minimalist. What happens is one gets older, and I speak from the position as someone who's older, is that you acquire stuff. You sometimes get given heirlooms and you can't exactly throw them away. So you begin to acquire stuff. So what do you do with that stuff now? You're going to put it in storage, or you're going to display it? So it's an interesting question about, and I think some of those practices still continue. Someone mentioned Stuart Hall pops in, definitely. So Tales from the Front Room is available on YouTube. Sorry. Anything to add, Zarifa, to that?
I'm going to pop in because I was asked about like Hispano-Caribbean front rooms.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm from Chicago. So I think obviously region plays a big part in how you use your house. And in Chicago, our lots are really long. And there is parking in the front, but more often you're gonna park in the back. So even if you have a house or you live in an apartment building, you're more than likely going to be walking up the back stairs, which takes you to the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take you to the front room.
Yeah.
So I grew up always coming into the house through the kitchen.
Yeah.
That's where everything happened. That's where aunties talked. That's where you learned, life. And front rooms. I mean, I distinctly remember a woman who used to watch me after school. Her front room had like a baby door,
Mm-hmm.
right? And her child was like 2 years younger than me. So there was no babies, and she had a teenage daughter, but like you could not go into this living room, and it was all white from top to bottom, and like everything was white. And I don't think it's just like Caribbean families, because these people were Italian, and I knew some other Italians as well, were like, you would never be in the front room unless you were having a family reunion, and you only like took pictures there apparently.
Yeah.
So that you could like make it seem as if y'all had like a really nice house all the time, but really it's just the living room that looks beautiful and immaculate. So the kitchen in the homes of friends of family is where decorations is where like, I mean, a lot of what I see in the front room here, I saw a lot of that in the kitchen. Okay. And there was almost always a table either near or close to the kitchen, depending on the size of the house.
Yeah.
So I find that now as well, when I lived on my own and I would have my girlfriends over, everything always started in the kitchen.
Yes.
And it maybe would move to the living room.
Yes.
To the living room area.
Yes.
But more often than not, it always stayed in the kitchen.
Yes.
I now live in Barcelona in a teeny tiny flat, so my living room is my kitchen and vice versa. So it all just happens in the same space anyway. But yeah, I think the kitchen played more of an importance in people's lives, at least from my own experience. In Chicago.
That's a very good point, Marcia, because the kitchen is actually, on some level, a more interesting space than the front room. Because for me, it's where more interesting conversations take place. We're more relaxed, more informal. The front room is a very formal space. The kitchen, often because it's warm, it's with food, it's where we commune around food. It kind of helps to loosen the tongue, as it were, in terms of conversation sometimes. Maybe a few drinks might help there. But sometimes you also have a back room, which is a living room.
Yes.
which you wouldn't use the front room because it's almost like a shrine, and you only use the front room on special occasions, but you'd have a more informal space that could be the living room or the kitchen if you have a large enough kitchen.
Yeah.
When
So
most
one
people who are familiar, most people that you're familiar with, your friends, your relatives, that's where they'd come, because they're just passing through. You don't need to entertain them. They're just passing through. They're dropping off something. They're having a little chit chat. You wouldn't necessarily put them in the front room. It's more strangers that you'd bring into the front room, I think. So it's something really interesting that resonates in terms of what you described there, Marcia. I mean, you connected to kind of, because which island are your parents from in the Caribbean?
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. So do you look out for kind of Puerto Ricans wherever you go?
Of course. I think I was like one of the only Puerto Ricans in Britain for a really long time. There were Cubans, so that was wonderful.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
live in a neighborhood full of Dominicans, so you know, we're neighbors, we're homies. It's fine. Yeah, I do. But something I learned when I was living in the UK is that culturally, I find that I resonate with West Indians much more than I did with other Latin American, like diasporic kids.
Yeah.
Because even if you speak the same language and, you know, there is a lot of like music that we all enjoy together.
Yeah.
Culturally, it's really kind of under the radar, but there is a big difference. And I found that, you know, people whose families are like Dominican, like I understand so much immediately in a way that, I mean, I might get flamed for this on the internet, but it's fine. In the United States, you're almost forced to be a homogenous group with other Latinos, even if culturally there's a lot of differences.
Yes.
And I would, you know, I felt at home with West Indian people. So
I'll defend you, Marcia. I'll defend you, Marcia, because I think you're saying something very powerful there. If you look at the Caribbean, we share a common history.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this is part of my research now anyway. So the book, The Repeating Island, kind of really goes through that quite eloquently in that, you know, the Caribbean, island by island, the same dynamics happen just at different times. And it's that different timeline that breaks the Caribbean apart on top of language.
Yes.
Which obviously has, you know, a massive influence on how we kind of talk to each other. But the problem with Spanish as a language is that it's been racialized in a way that kind of makes an even bigger divide.
Yes.
And so we have to be able to like come together on common ground, which is food, which is folk dance, which is practice in the house, socially. You know, divide and conquer has worked very well across the Caribbean, in my opinion. And
definitely,
if I look at Puerto Rican folk dance, it's no different than what I see from Guadeloupe.
Yeah, yeah.
So you know, it's just,
yeah, and you're speaking to something so important in the Caribbean, a sense of Caribbean identity rather than island identity. That is our strength. And I think from the 50s, when they attempted to have a West Indian Federation, which I suspect was destabilized, America didn't want that. America didn't want the Caribbean to come together. But there's a pan-Caribbean identity that we all share. And, you know, with, you know, maybe not time to kind of unpack that, but is the history, that colonial history of slavery, the import of Africa, that space where these kind of languages and cultures come together and create a new Creole, is all part of the Caribbean. And we have influenced our brothers and sisters in America as well.
I find it, sorry to cut in. I find it so interesting listening to the conversation as it relates to the separation of the front room from everywhere else, and the fact that it was not only made for, well, set up for the entertainment of strangers, but well, in my context, I grew up in Barbados, and my family, my immediate family wasn't so tied to the original separation of the living room from the kitchen. However, when I went to my grandparents, there was this strict divide, and it was like if you even venture into the front room, they would be backing out, right?
That's right.
So, and it was also a situation where um, my cousins that lived overseas, when they would come back to Barbados for vacation or what's not, I guess they fell into the group of strangers or strange people to the household because they were often allowed to go in the front room or use the front table. And it was a situation where my grandmother had a setup. It was almost like a formal dining table that no one really used during the year, but it was just a situation where visitors would come, they will have the nice china there put out, they will have the same cabinets that you referred to. So it's just so interesting to hear that this is a common experience throughout Caribbean islands or throughout families over the years.
Yeah, that's a really good point you're making, TLB. It would be really lovely to see your lovely face, though. I think a lot of that speaks to a colonial elite practice. Coming out of slavery, the former enslaved have to reconstruct themselves as human. And who did they begin to look up to was the middle-class colonial elite, the Victorian bourgeoisie. And that colonial elite in the Caribbean, for instance, and elsewhere across the British Empire, had the resources, had the space to have a front room and a living room and a kitchen and so forth. So I don't want to use the word imitation, but there's certainly a sense of kind of maybe appropriation of it, that setting, that setup of the home, and all of the kind of Victorian values that go with it, and which you find that the older generation seem to embody in a sense. And as time goes on, it becomes less formalized. And I think coming here, because, you know, my parents, like a lot of that Windrush generation, grew up in a colonial education system. You know, they knew sometimes more about English society and British culture than the English themselves. They saw themselves as British citizens. So they came with a kind of coloniality, a colonial identity here. And you know, Stuart Hall talks about that very eloquently as a colonial subject. And then they come at a time here when they're encountering mass consumer culture, during the 1950s and 60s. And they begin to participate in that. Modernity, why not? Their countries are becoming independent, you know. So now they are actually consumers now, in a sense, in Britain. And that goes the same for Brooklyn, Toronto, if we're just thinking about, you know, the kind of Anglophone Caribbean diaspora. I think that goes the same also for the Caribbean communities who came to Holland, France, and elsewhere, even Spain. So it's a really good point you've made, TLB.
Apologies that I don't have the background turned on, but it's just, as I said, it's just very, very interesting listening to the back and forth conversation as it relates to growing up in the Caribbean and the whole setup of the front room, as we would call it, or the living room.
Yeah.
Oh, and another difference that I would have discovered when I came to the UK, because I migrated within the last couple of years, it's a situation where here they refer to it as the sitting room, whereas a sitting room back home in Barbados for me would have been a literal sitting room with probably mahogany chairs and what's not.
Yeah.
And a living room would have been where you have like the settee and the TV and what's not. You spend time with the family.
That's right.
So yeah, that's a difference that I noticed as well too.
Yes, of course. Of course, you know, the front room is the parlor. That's what it is. It's the Victorian parlor. So you're absolutely right. And you know, these names, these terms are different spaces in the home and how they use differently.
I mean, I certainly grew up with that. Like the front room was the room that we weren't allowed to go in, but there was also the back room, which is where, as you say, like that was just a casual. If someone was just dropping something, just dropping in the pass through, or there's a kitchen as well. But it was definitely like the space of the back room or the sitting room, and then the front room was the main room.
Yeah, I'm glad you've come in there, Zarifa. I was hogging it a bit.
It's okay.
Because I can chat for hours about this. I mean, I've done so much research.
There is a question in here, and I think you're probably better for you to talk to it, which is can we describe about the Chinese Caribbean front rooms?
Ah, that's a really good question. So Chinese people, like other communities, Indian as well, have been present in the Caribbean. I would think that there would be Chinese elements in their front rooms to assert and affirm their sense of Chineseness within the Caribbean. I'm writing a piece at the moment for an artist from China who is interested in a Chinese guy from Hong Kong who came to Jamaica and recorded a reggae song in Jamaica, and he's from Hong Kong. So I'm writing a piece about that. But also what I want to talk about is the presence of the Chinese ethnic group within the Caribbean, across the Caribbean. You know, where does chow mein come from? Black people love Chinese food. Why? Because the Chinese have been there have had a long presence there, and have occupied a kind of business class, just like the Indo-Caribbeans. So I think it's important to be inclusive in thinking about, you know, the Caribbean as this mixture of different kind of cultures coming from different places. The question is also like, okay, they're representing some of it's a mixed match, it's a hybrid of their Caribbeanness, but also Chineseness in the Caribbean. It's something worth unpacking, actually. I can only say so much as what I've said already.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And on my Jamaican side, I have Chinese relatives married in, and also who are my cousins as well. And from what I've seen in the time that I've spent in with them, there is this mismatch or mixture of like their Chinese heritage, also intertwined with the Caribbean heritage as well, that you see in their houses. So you'll see iconography tapping back to the Chinese heritage, as much as you will see, you know, images from the Caribbean.
Yeah. Someone has some comment about an Indian influence in the Caribbean. That's very important. I think it's Patricia A. I mean, I'm part Indian, so I would say I'm a Dougla. And in Trinidad, I don't know if you can comment on this, Zarifa, that 50% of the population is Indian, Indo-Caribbean, or nearly that. But in the representation, you don't really get that Indian presence being in terms culturally. I mean, Trinidad is one place, Guyana is another, a bit more even contested in Guyana. But we do, you know, we can talk about the food, the kind of Indian presence within the food there, and maybe religious and spiritual practices as well, as much as it.
Because as you said, there's a high proportion of Indians in Trinidad who practice the Hindu religion. So I know that when my mum's gone over at times to spend time with her friends, and her friends are Indian, she always goes over around the time they're celebrating Diwali, and it's a real big thing in the same way that we would experience it in other Asian communities, like in the UK, for example, that there's a big Diwali festivals that happen in Trinidad. But I think also as well, and I mean, some of this needs to be unpacked, there's also, you start to look into class as well.
Yes.
In the Caribbean, and there is, like, you know, the Trinidad or the Caribbean blacks and the Caribbean Indians, and the whole thing around colorism and class
That's
comes
right.
into
That's
play
right.
with all of that, and that all needs to be unpacked because there's resentment on both sides.
There is. And it's important to mention one of the great novelists who wrote a very important book here in the 50s called The Lowly Londoners, Sam Salvin, was of Indian Trinidadian descent. I mean, that was his heritage. So that needs to be acknowledged. But on another level, I understand also sometimes we kind of have to come to, certainly in the face of racism in this country, we kind of have to we have to have some sense of solidarity. So those ethnic differences get squashed, as it were, but they are important, they're there. And you're absolutely right, class is an interesting dynamic. I think marriage is another interesting dynamic around ethnicity. And identity. Who does one identify oneself as coming here? If, for instance, you come here and to all intents and purposes, you could pass as Indian, as Southeast Asian. Yeah. And that may be because of the racial system here. So it is a complex question that does deserve unpacking. Someone's talked about Chinese Cubans. Yeah, definitely. Yes, someone talked about you had to punch money. So this might be unusual for younger people, that we had to punch money in the television to get it to work. Yes.
We had to punch money in the meter, 50 pence.
That's right. Or a shilling.
Yeah. Michael, there was a question earlier in the chat about drinks. What drinks you would see in the Caribbean or West Indian front room. And one of the things that we weren't able to get our hands on for our exhibition was not the bar or the drinks cabinet. There was the other little drinks unit, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Like a circular unit that had all the different drinks. And I mean, I know that my parents had one, and this was like in the 80s. But the drinks that I always saw in there would be rum. So it would either be Ray and Nephew or Cockspur. But other drinks like Cinzano, I remember that being
Cinzano. Baby Sham, Cherry,
yeah.
Guinness, Stout, Mackerson Stout. When we did the installation, we didn't have one of those cabinets. We just put the drinks on a drinks trolley because I wanted to show off the drinks. And then someone mentioned the plastic pineapple ice bucket. If you have one that has brick thick on the bottom of it, it's collectible. Do not throw it away. It's worth money. I mean, that's one of the things I've done doing this. Stone ginger wine. And then, of course, Marby, which is a very Eastern Caribbean thing. And I love Marby. Avocado, Baby Sham, St. John Commandeer, Sherry, yes. That's right. And then there's all these other drinks that were made. Guinness Punch, Irish Moss,
Sorrel
Punch.
Yeah.
TLB is wanting to ask a question again. Carrot
no,
juice.
I was adding sorrel drink.
Sorrel.
Sorrel.
I've got some made here, but because of the lockdown, we can't get it anywhere to anybody. But it's got
We
rum
never
in it.
had drinks in our living room front rooms. So this is really interesting to me that there were drinks in there. A drink in the front.
Yeah. Marcia, it's a space of contradictions.
I'm just thinking about the time that my mother lit potpourri. It was like wax potpourri that you heated on the other side, and it like boiled and it exploded, and my father was tight. And I'm just thinking like, oh man, I wonder what would have happened if someone had spilled a drink on the white couch.
Oh Lord. Oh dear, trouble.
So just like hearing that people like just left like bottles of booze in the living room. That's wild to me.
No. It isn't like that kind of that bomb site of decadence after the day after. Oh, there's order here, Marcia, in terms of the drinks. And I think Zarifa is actually right. The drinks are kind of cordoned off. They're cordoned off because you don't have drinking all the time. You don't drink all the time.
Our drinks were always like in
Hidden.
a cabinet.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're hidden. They're hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
The alcoholic drinks are hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, and I said, my grandma used to have. She still more or less has kept her house very similar to how it used to be. It's a bit more modern, but it's very similar to how it used to be.
Yeah.
So the sitting room is still the old one. It has like the big picture of Mary with the halo and like the cross. I think it's Mary.
Yes.
With like Jesus is our Lord underneath a massive
Oh,
writing.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The TV in the corner, obviously the other things on the other side. I've got like Martin Luther King on one side of the living room, the sitting room, and then you have Bob Marley as well. And it was replaced. I remember the picture that was replaced after he died. So it has like the day he was born, you know, the year he was born and died, etc. And obviously in the other side of the room, in the other living room, because the sitting room I could never go in there, but it was really interesting because the staircase was in the middle. You come into the house, and the sitting room was the typical one that everyone had. Yeah. And then the living room was the one that you use more for eating and things like that. It was like a living room diner because it's the only space that she had. And I remember getting trapped. She was looking for me, and I got trapped. Well, I say I got trapped. I got trapped in the sitting room, and then I knew I had to get out because she was fighting. I was like, oh my God, she's gonna find me. And then I was like, oh, I was just, I wonder what's in there. She goes, what are you doing in there? I was like, I was just looking for things. And like my other grandma had, she didn't have the sitting room. Well, actually, I don't tell, like she did. She had like a combination of a sitting room and a very formal living room. So she had, like TLB was saying, she had like these really nice chairs and this massive, really dark, I don't know how expensive that table was, but the table looked like it was worth $1 million. Very expensive tables.
Exactly.
Really dark brown wood. Like almost like the wood was black. It was that kind of dark brown.
Yeah.
And it had like glass on the table, and you could move the glass. So if the glass was out a bit, she could tell that you touched the table and you weren't meant to touch the table. Yeah. Now she had the chairs around it that were tucked in. And I remember like in my other grandma's living room, she used to have like a little cabinet, obviously where you mentioned about the drinks. And yeah, I was always petrified about the Jesus picture. People, it's when you think it's really weird, like it's weird. But and yeah, she had like this little cabinet, and I remember saying she wanted me to get a drink for my uncle, so I went into the cabinet, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm getting a drink for uncle." And she's like, "No, I mean the kitchen. Go in the kitchen because that cabinet is for like particular people." And this was obviously like way into like, oh, it must be like the very end of like the 90s, like early 90s. So like she still remembers that that's something you don't touch.
Yes.
It's interesting you raise that actually, because my parents have a drinks, like they've got one of those wall units, and in that wall unit,
oh yes,
there's like 1 million drinks that have probably been there. They're probably drinks probably as old as me, they're just there for show. Yeah. But very occasionally, if people come around, they might open up the special drink and allow like them to have the special drink. And that was one of the things actually that I took that on as well. Like, so I have a drinks cabinet, and my drink, there's certain drinks that don't get open unless certain people are coming or it's a celebration. That is something that I've taken, you know, from my grandma and also my parents. And
yeah.
The other thing I think that the theme that I like that's coming through what you just explained was almost a sense of fear around being caught in that front room or going anywhere near there. I remember opening the door. I used to open the door really slow, peek my head in, and I'd get shouted out, "What you do? What you do?" And then more time it was locked. More time the key, it was locked and the key was put somewhere where I couldn't see it. And then it got opened when people were going to be, we knew that it was going to be a day of entertaining or party time. But it's that fear, I suppose, as a child, like to not go anywhere near there. Yeah. The other side of that fear is if you ever broke anything in there. So when you were told to go in and clean and you broke anything, like I remember breaking things and trying to hide them. Hide it and hoping that I wouldn't get caught. And eventually I did get caught. And yeah, you know how that probably would have turned out. But the whole sort of sense around that, the fear, because it is the place of pride.
That's right, exactly. And they spend time and money to buy those things in there.
Yeah, you didn't realize it as a child, but it was actually, now I think about it and now I know why someone was not. It's like I remember I was a teenager and I had this marble ball. Used to go on school trips to, like, you know, the theme parks, and I got this marble ball, and I used to like Harry Potter times, and I was playing with the marble ball like in front of the mirror, because obviously I wanted to like watch myself play with the ball. And then I was going up and down and up and down and up and down. And my mum, I didn't realize it. I just thought it was a sink. I just thought it was a sink. I didn't think anything of it. So she had, she got like the porcelain sink and a porcelain toilet and everything, because she got them in the house when we moved in. And I missed the ball and it fell on the sink, and I had to like, yeah, exactly. And I had to like push. I was like, oh my God. And I was like, if I don't say anything to her, she won't find out. So it was fine. But it's one of those things that, you know, I managed to like push it and it was fine. And you know, you always know when you've done something wrong as a child that when someone calls your name in a just raise their voice by a decibel, you know they found out. You just know they found out. Yes. And then she screamed my government name, and then I realized, yeah, she knows. Just the pitch, I was like, she knows. And then I was finished.
There's interesting questions about religion coming in here, and seeing Jesus and being fearful of Jesus, because of course Jesus could come and strike you in the front room at any time. So I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, Zarifa, but you know, religion is very important, even though you're not religious.
Yeah, I mean, we had the Jesus picture in the living room, but we also had it around the house as well. There was a massive one, you know, the Last Supper.
The Last Supper.
There was a massive one about this big, Last Supper on the stairs. So as you go up the stairs, you always see, that's the first thing you see when you come out of the bathroom. It's this picture. And then we had it in other parts of the house as well. Yeah. It's a permanent reminder to behave yourself, basically.
Oh yes, it's a moral code, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, my parents weren't that religious, but we did have religious pictures. And I sometimes think it's about respectability as well, on some level, or as you say, a kind of moral code for us children to behave, because we're under surveillance from above.
I think I was extra naughty because I was forced to have one in my room.
Oh, really?
Yes, I can see it now.
And would that be, what would that religion, what denomination would that be?
It was just Catholic. Yeah. Catholic. Yeah. It's just like a typical like white Jesus print. You know, really soft around the edges. But I don't really remember it saying, well, I shouldn't say that. I do remember seeing it in a lot of people's houses, but we didn't really have pictures of Jesus in the house. It was just in my room. So I was extra naughty.
Holy Mary.
Publicly admit that.
Yeah.
You know, in that generation, in the actual Caribbean itself, were people's living rooms similar in terms of the religious adornment and things like that? Because obviously when you see them now, they look very different. So at the time, if you know from your research what they were like then for those people who had them, because I know obviously not everybody did, which is why people are sending resources back home and things like that. So do you know what they were like in the region itself at the time?
That's a really good question, Isaac. I mean, a lot of that Windrush generation, so-called the first Caribbean, usually came from very poor backgrounds. And so their living conditions were quite stark, bare. They may have had a living room and basic elements, and they may have expressed their religious identity in there. The significant thing about expressing your religious identity for not only Caribbean, but African people, all people of color in this country, is that there has been racism in the English church. So you had a lot of Black people were told not to return to certain churches. And so they then resorted to expressing their religious identity in the home. And hence they had scripture meetings and prayer meetings in the front room because they were just barred from churches. And I'm not saying that goes for everyone, but these incidences are shocking enough to hear that, you know, in a church, because of your racial, you are told not to come back.
We picked that up in our exhibition, actually, when we did Windrush, and that's the one thing that stuck with me. We did some work with some people from the community who actually, we worked with poets, the spoken word artist, Malika Booker.
Yeah.
And we'd commissioned her to do some poetry around Windrush, and she spent some time with people in the community. And this thread came out around the fact that we weren't welcomed in churches in the UK. And so they had to create their own church, and their own churches were created out of people's homes.
That's right.
And that is sort of the birth of the Black Church in the UK. That was something that I didn't know, and I was really fascinated by it. And it was really hearing some of those stories of people saying, we turned up to church, you know, we'd pressed our clothes, we'd done our hair, we had our best on, we've turned up to church, and we just weren't allowed in, or if we were just treated with so much hostility that we just didn't want to return.
Exactly.
So yeah.
That's right. And I think Dorothy's made a point about, you know, we were worried also about the racist neighbors. We were worried about the outside. We just weren't wanted here. So that our homes became a refuge on some level. Although as you got older, it probably became something you wanted to escape from. But yes, definitely, racism is a manifestation of Satan. This is pure Satan. Yes, I would agree, pure evil.
I'm so sorry to cut in.
Cut in.
I'm conscious of time, so I would just ask if there was just one more question, if we could just answer just one more question, and then we'll think.
Sorry, is there anyone else that wants to make a contribution before I make this one? Anyway, right. In terms of the cleaning of the furniture, I know there was a commonality among Bajans in terms of like the different products that they would use. I'm not sure if this is something that was a trend around the Caribbean, but basically, ironically enough, one of the things that we used to clean our mahogany furniture at home was called Old English sheen. So basically, the parents or the grandparents would say, go and get the Old English and the cloth to clean the mahogany furniture. So yeah, that's basically a memory that came back.
Yeah.
I just wanted to just mention, I think somebody asked about in the Caribbean, if you had front rooms, which was similar or on the same parallel as to the front rooms in the UK that my mum and everyone's mums had. Well, where I grew up in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, I was aware that we had we had a bit of a status in the community, and we had quite a relatively large house. We had a room which was similar to a front room. It was polished and shined, usually by myself as a little one, and it was shined till you could see your face in it. You weren't really allowed to run up and down in there. And you had what we call whatnots.
Mm-hmm.
And a whatnot was just like a display cabinets that you would put, so you wouldn't have a room that was locked away and was sacred and a sacred space, but you add objects. You would have objects that you would still considered had status because you have acquired them. So it might be that you were the only person that had the little radio in the community, and your little radio was up on the whatnot, and you had, a few ornaments or something that somebody had brought back from England or whatever. But so we did have something that was very similar, which was, it's about status and aspirations, and it was modeled off Marsa, who had things that you wanted to show that you were arriving and you were different from, the average. So I would say that they were very similar. If they were very similar in the Caribbean, but depending on what on your means, really.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point, Mona, you've made about class in the front room.
Thank you very much for that. I can see there's one more question, so I'm sorry, that will, the person who has their hand up, this will take that one question, and that will be the last for this evening, and then we'll draw things to a close. So if the person who has raised their hand would like to ask the question.
Hi, good evening. I think my hand is raised. I hope you can hear me. Just to say, actually, it's not really a question. It's just to say what an absolutely fantastic event it has been. Zaretha knows that I absolutely love her. This is a conversation we've had several times about the front room. I've had the pleasure of doing some cultural work with her, and it's been amazing. And Michael McMillan, I have to say, thank you so much. Your family member will tell you that I've been tracking you for years, and I hope to connect with you again. The conversation has just been phenomenal. And thank you both so much for bringing this really important event to so many people. It absolutely has to remain. I am just in awe. So Ashe, I say to you both.
Ashe.
Thank you.
Ashe. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for that. And on that note, can we please give Dr. Michael and Zaretha a huge clap for their time this evening. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. This conversation has been incredibly interesting. We have learned so much, and I just wanted to share a few things that I've taken away from this. First of all, Michael McMillan made that the front room is a space of contradictions. That really stuck with me. And I love the discussion about how we infused our creolized style and how ideas around gender and patriarchy were both reinforced and challenged, and the similarity between Dutch Caribbean and Anglophonic Caribbean rooms, and how Dutch Caribbean rooms tended to express more indigenous religions. And that's so, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because we are hoping to do an event on our indigenous Caribbean religions in the next few months. So we will be getting to that. Thank you so much. We discussed the pride in being able to own your own home and how special that room was. And also, of course, the very huge amount of importance that we placed on discipline and hygiene, and how material and cultural, what the material and cultural objects of the room are. Again, the discussion about, of course, the book, The Repeating Island, and how these ideas and how the similarities within our cultures and our rooms are repeated throughout our different countries and cultures. So thank you so much for that. We have learned so much this evening, and we are incredibly grateful to both of you for your time this evening. Thank you so much. I'm now going to pass over to Isaac, who is going to announce the end of the event. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's been a wonderful time, and this is unfortunately the end of the event. I'd like to thank the panelists for agreeing to speak on our panel, and delivering their expertise and their memories, which are really precious, especially at a time when everyone's remembering lots of things that are happening all around the world. I want to thank the Caribbean Links team for being brilliant, and for bringing this event together, and for all the hard work that we've put in to put this event on and to put it out to the world. And thank you to everyone for attending, because it's been a really good time to look back at what people who came before us, brought into our lives, and the memories that we all have. So thank you. I'd like to hand over to Stacey.
Yeah, so I've just put in the chat our Instagram and Twitter handles. I know someone asked me about our YouTube channel. It's not quite running just yet, but we have recorded this on our previous events. And as soon as it's up and running, we'll put that on our YouTube channel. But if you follow us on Instagram and Twitter, then you'll be able to know when that is up and running. And I will hand back to Afia to let us know about our next event.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for that. Yes, we will be having, because our events are once a month, and we will be having our next event in February, and that is going to be about the history of carnivals in the Caribbean. And we look forward to welcoming you all. We will be discussing so much, and we are looking forward to learning about all of that. So thank you all so much for coming. We appreciate you. Thank you for staying with us this evening and enjoying this incredibly interesting conversation with us. Thank you to our guests, thank you to our panelists, and we will see you soon at the next event. Thank you all. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, Afia. Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Isaac. Anybody I haven't, and of course Zarifa.